Welcome to the Advanced Programming Unit. This will be Lesson 1. So, to start, let me introduce myself. My name is Andrea, and I'm a senior at the University of Michigan from Chicago, Illinois. My hobbies include eating a lot of food, trying new food, hiking, and playing video games. I'm an instructor for UTK, and I was able to teach in Lima, Peru in the summer of 2019. In this unit, we're going to cover some basic topics of advanced programming. These include basic components of programming, logic, and Arduino programming. And then we're going to move on to engineering design topics, and lastly, your final project. Today's agenda is as follows. First, we will answer the question, what is programming? And then move on to components and logic in programming. At the end, there will be a demonstration by my teaching partner, Hannah, who you will also see later in the next video. So let's start. What is computer programming? Computer programming is a series of steps or instructions that tell a computer what to do. Think of it like following a recipe for baking a cake. You are acting as the computer, and the recipe is the code put together telling you what to do. The lines of code are the steps that a computer follows. Collectively, the lines of code together describe an algorithm. There are different types of programs on a computer that use different types of code, otherwise known as programming languages. And each language has their own set of words, rules, and symbols. All of these together are known as syntax. Almost anything you're using on a computer or your phone has computer programming behind it. Think about the code that is used to present you a YouTube video on the website. That's HTML and CSS. What about the code behind the apps on your phone like Facebook, TikTok, and Snapchat? This all uses JavaScript, jQuery, Python, and other languages that I can't even name. And then there's other things that programming can be used for, like medical software, data science and analytics, and math. Programming software like MATLAB can be used to solve mathematical problems, make graphs, and so on. There's also basic components of programming that we'll touch on today. So variables. Variables are a way to store information that can be used in a program. Think of a variable as a box. It holds something that can also be changed later on. And it's very important to keep track of them or keep track of this box. The declaration of a variable is as follows. You start with the type, name a variable, and you set it equal to a value. Variables are always described as a type when you're declaring them. So some basic examples are int, which are whole numbers like 1, -2, and 3. We also have double, which are real numbers that include decimals, so 1, 4, or -9.2. There's also strings, which are just simple words like hello, and sentences like hello world. You can use any character as long as it's in between the quotation points. We also have bool, which holds either the value true or false, nothing else. Conditions. If something is a conditional in a program, then the computer has to decide to do something with the information it's given. Think about you deciding if you're hungry. The conditional statement you ask yourself is, am I hungry? If that is true, then you will decide to eat. If not, then you will not eat and nothing will happen. The same applies to the computer. The computer will check if something is true or not, and then the computer will know what to do depending on the result of that check. So recall the variable type bool, and look at this little example. Bool hungry equals true. That's our variable called hungry. Already, this is set to true. So, like you thought of before, you are hungry. There's also another variable called eat. Right now, eating is false, because we are not eating. So the computer will check, is hungry true? So that's displayed by what's highlighted in yellow. If hungry equals true, then eat will become true. And this also shows us that you can change a variable later on in a program. So originally eat was set to false, but now it's true. Then we have loops. Sometimes we want a program to do something multiple times. A loop can be used to make a function execute more than once. There's two very common types of loops. There's a while loop and a for loop. The difference between a while loop and a for loop is that for a while loop, when the number of times we want it to run are not exactly known, we'll use a while loop. The declaration of a while loop only has a condition. If a condition is always met, however, the loop will run infinitely. So say, while hungry, eat true. If you're always hungry, eating will always be true. A for loop. This is for when we know how many times we want the loop to run. The declaration of a for loop has an initialization, a condition, and an iteration all in one line. The initialization is where you want to start counting from your for loop, and your iteration is how much you want the computer to count by. So, for example, a while loop on the left, you have your variable before the while loop, int miles run equals 0. At this point, miles run has no value besides 0. But then we want to add to it. So, while miles run is less than 5, that's our conditional, miles run equals miles run plus 1. So, as this while loop executes, it will add plus 1 to the variable miles run, up until it's the value of 5. And then it will stop running. For a for loop, we have our variable int miles run equals 0. The initialization is for int counter equals 0, so we want to start counting at 0, and then we want our conditional, counter is less than 5, and then we have our iterator, count plus plus. This plus plus does not mean plus 2, it simply means plus 1, and it's one way that some programs use to iterate plus 1 to write less code, essentially. So in our for loop, we have miles run equals miles run plus 1. But unlike the while loop, this isn't going to run until the miles run value is less than 5. It's going to run until the variable counter is less than 5, because that's the one we're iterating in our for loop. In the next section of this video, Hannah's going to show you a demonstration of what you learned here with for loops and while loops, as well as variable types and conditional statements. So you can follow along with her.
Hi, my name's Hannah, and I'm a freshman at the University of Michigan. I'll be showing you how to program in C++ using Labster. So Labster works by having two tabs, the source code tab where you type in your code, and the simulation tab where you test your code. So we're going to be typing in the source code first. The first thing I'm going to teach you is about variables. Variables can have a lot of types, like you learned earlier. One type is an integer, and you make an integer variable by doing int, the variable name, I'm going to just do number, equals what the variable is equal to, and I'm going to just do 1. So this is setting the integer variable num to 1, which is initializing and declaring the variable num. If I were to do num equals hi, you would see that there's an error because you can only store numbers in integer variables. If I wanted to store a string, I have to create another variable. I would do that by saying string name equals whatever string I want to store it as. So I'm going to do Hannah. So this creates a string named and stores in the name Hannah. And strings are shown by having quotes on either side. So now that we learned a little bit about variables, we're going to learn about conditional statements. So a conditional statement in C++ is an if statement. You make if statements by doing if, 2 parentheses, 2 curly brackets. So whatever's in the parenthesis is the condition. So if num equals 1, which is saying if num is equal to the number 1, and you always have 2 equal signs, then something will happen. So num equals 5. If I were to make another if statement and say if num equals 5, or equals 1 again, num equals 2. This would evaluate to false because the first one would be true. So since number is equal to 1 at the start, number would change to 5. So when it gets down to this if statement, 5 is not equal to 1, so number would not change to 2. And we can show how this works by using something called the cout statement. So a cout statement is used in C++ to print things to the terminal. So I would do cout num. So this should print out whatever's in variable num to the terminal. So let's see if that works. Save, simulation. So the good thing about Lapster is you can work your way through your code. So if you use the step forward button, you'll see that it checks if num is equal to 1, which it is, then num would be equal to 5. And it checks the second if statement, which is false. So it just prints out 5, shown here in the console. Perfect. So if I were to go back to source code, I can teach you about loops. So loops are important for changing the efficiency of your code. So instead of coding a bunch of lines doing the same thing, you can just use a loop. There's multiple different loops, but one of them is called a while loop. So while, 2 parentheses, 2 curly brackets. So whatever is in the parentheses, the condition, the same thing as in a conditional statement. So while num is greater than 6, then num equals num minus 1. So this would be checking if number is greater than 6, then you would keep making number go down by 1. But this would not run, this while loop would not run because number is equal to 5 and 5 is not equal to 6. If we were to change the 6 to 4, then it would run and we could increase the variable number so that way it got bigger. But for the while loop, you always have to have something that will stop the condition. So if it's at 5, you need to make it so this condition will someday be false. If we were to do number plus 1, it would never be false. But if we were to do minus, it would get below 4. So let's try this out with a cout num. And I'm going to remove the cout statement so we only get the last one. So save, simulation, restart, skip to end fast so we can see. You see how it's equal to 4? It's because this while loop ran one time, which made the number equal to 1 minus it. So 5 minus 1 would be equal to 4. There's also another type of loop called the for loop. So for loop works by doing for int I equals 0, I is less than 2, I plus plus. So the int I equals 0 is to initialize and declare a starting point for the loop. This is the end case, which means it will keep running until I is less than 2, and I will increase every time. So let's do cout high, which means that high should run 2 times because it would run for I equals 0 and I would equal 1 because 1 is the last number that's less than 2. Let's see if that works. Save, restart, skip to the end. We can see high is twice, so that works. And that's how you code using C++. I hope you had a great time and continue to play around with some of the functions. Bye!